This video will discuss the midpoint formula, Unit 2, Lesson 7 for Mrs. Bailey's geometry class. Find the midpoint of each segment. The midpoint is the middle point of a segment. It is the point that divides a segment into two equal pieces. Many of these, especially when they're graphed, we can visually find the midpoint without needing any special formula. So looking at segment AB, the midpoint is here, as it's 2 units away from A and 2 units away from B. Looking at segment CD, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 units long, so the midpoint would have to be 2.5 units away from C and 2.5 units away from D. Looking at letter F, slanted lines, we can still count our units. Looks like it's right here. 2 units away, 2 units away. However, that's not going to work all of the time. For instance, look at GH. When we go to count the boxes, they're not whole lines. Notice in E, it had a slope of 1/1, which made it nice. But if I were to ask you to find me the midpoint of GH, you may be able to plot a line, but you're not necessarily sure what value it is. So I would like to show you how to do it using a formula when you're not able to necessarily plot it. So the midpoint formula is essentially finding the average of the x's and the average of the y's, because the midpoint is in the middle, as is average. Think about finding average regarding how you did it in junior high. You add everything up and you divide by how many there are. So if you think about the value of the x's, there's an x and a y, and there's an x and a y. So in every segment, there are 2 x's and 2 y's. So to find the midpoint, you add up the value of your x's and divide by 2. Then add up the value of the y's and divide by 2. It looks kind of confusing because of the parentheses and the comma, but all it's telling you is that the midpoint, for instance, is the point 2, 4. Or that it's the point 1, 1, or that it's the point 1, 2, 3, negative 1.5. So because midpoint is a point, thinking about making a point is always used by an ordered pair. It is an average of the x's of each ordered pair and an average of the y of each ordered pair. Without graphing, find the midpoint of each of the segments below. So for 3A, B, and C, you have no graph, and you're being asked to find the midpoint. We're going to find the average. We need to find the average of the x's, 8 plus the negative 2, and divide by 2, and find the average of the y values, 6 plus 12, and divide by 2. Grab your calculators if you need it. This is going to give me 6/2, which is 3. And this is going to give me 18/2, which is 9. So if you were to have plotted these values on a coordinate grid, which why do you need to when we can find the average? The ordered pair for the midpoint is 3, 9. Next one, letter B. Find the average of your x's, 4 plus the negative 2. There's 2 values, so we divide by 2. And then you're going to do it for your y's. 3 plus 10, divide by 2. This is going to give me 2/2, which is 1. And the y value is going to give me 13/2, which is 6.5. Letter C, give it a shot. I got an answer of 1,8. Pause the video and see if you can do the same. All right, there's my work for letter C. If you didn't get it, double check all of your calculator work. If you have a question, ask me in class. All right, last section. It says, number 4, find the other endpoint. Okay, so this is the harder of the midpoint formula. If you think about midpoint formula that we've been doing the 3 examples you just did, you were given 2 endpoints and you had to find the middle. The difference here is that you're asking to find the other endpoint. So they're telling you that in a segment, and this is by no means drawn to scale, that one of the endpoints is 12, 4. It's telling you that the midpoint is 6, 0, and you're being asked to find the other endpoint. Two different ways that you can do it, and I'm going to try to walk you through each way. One of them, a lot of you are going to be able to think through this logically, that if you have an x value at 12 and the other x values at 6, then that means the x's went down 6 values or 6 points. So then this x must be a 0 if it continued going down by 6. Thinking about the y's, to get from 4 over to 0, it went down 4. So to get from 0 over to this other unknown endpoint, it must have gone to the same distance because, again, midpoint is the same amount from both the x's and the y's. It's the middle of the values. So that means this other endpoint is 0, -4. Some of you are going to look at that and say, wait, what are you talking about? Where did you get those numbers? So we can do it algebraically. Think about it this way for a moment. If the midpoint formula says to average up your x's, average up your y's, and that's going to give you an x and a y that's the midpoint, then we can work backwards. And I'm going to do it one at a time. So let's look at our x values. This x value is one endpoint, which is a 12. And if I add it to the other unknown endpoint and divide by 2, it should equal the one in the middle. Now you have an algebraic equation that you can solve. Which is what I got. Thinking about it as well, the y values. There are two y values, one here and one here. The other endpoint y value is unknown. So if I take the 4 that I know and add it to the one that I don't know, whatever that is needs to equal the one in the middle. So 4 plus what divided by 2 is going to give you 0. Here's an algebraic equation that you can solve. So here's the ordered pair, 0, -4. So you can do it more logically, kind of looking at a diagram and counting, or you can do it algebraically. So let's look at letter B. Letter B reads, find the other endpoint. If you know one endpoint is 18.6, you know the midpoint is 12.2. Find the other endpoint. So this is the middle. The middle means that it's exactly halfway from either endpoint. So look at your x values, your 18 and your 12. If m is in the middle, to get from 18 down to 12, you lost 6 values, or you went down 6 spaces. If m is in the middle, then 12 must be the same distance away from the other endpoint. These distances are the same. So from one endpoint to the middle was -6, then from the middle down to the other endpoint must also be -6. So 12 minus 6 gives me the value of 6. Similarly, look at the y's. If one endpoint is at 6 and the midpoint is at 2, well, you had to go down 4 values. Same thing, if m is in the middle of the endpoint, then that other distance to get down to the other endpoint must also have been to have lost 4 values. So 2 minus 4 is a -2. Some students, most students, end up liking this eventually. You can always check it. If it says these are your endpoints and your endpoints, then double check. The red values, the x's, if you add them up and divide by 2, should give you the middle. The y's, if you add them up and divide by 2, should give you the middle. So you can check it as well. Algebraically, let's look at it this way. The formula says to add up the endpoints and divide by 2 of both the x's and the y's. Let me kind of rewrite some of this. So if one endpoint is 18.6 and the midpoint is 12.2, then the other endpoint is unknown. So this is the x of the endpoint, and this is the x of the middle. So when we think about this equation, these values are your middles. Set up an algebraic equation. The first x here is given to me, it's 18. I don't know the other endpoint, but I do know that if I add up both my endpoints, it should give me the middle, which they told me was 12. Now you have an equation. Same thing with the y's. The y value here is your endpoint. The other y is your other endpoint that you're trying to define. If you add up your endpoints and divide by 2, it's going to give you the y in the middle. Now you have an equation that you can solve. 6 plus y equals 4, minus 6 minus 6, y equals -2. So we should have 6, -2 for the other endpoint, which is what I got using the other method. Go ahead, pause your video, see if you can get letter C. All right, so how'd you do for letter C? I got an answer of -13, +10, and I have it written out both ways. If you're going to use the number line method, then your other endpoint, your midpoint, and your unknown endpoint are labeled. To get from 7 down to -3, start at 7 on a number line, get down to -3 is -10 units. So from -3 down -10 more is -13. If you're at -2 on the number line and you have to get up to 4, then you've increased 6 units. So from 4 increasing 6 another 6 units, you're at 10. Algebraically, if I have to take my x's, my endpoints divided by 2 will give me the middle, and then I have an equation to solve. That's -6, because I can multiply. -7 gives me -13. Thinking about your y values, your 2 endpoints divided by 2 should equal the middle. And now I have an equation that I can solve. -2 plus y equals 8, plus 2 plus 2 gives me 10. So you have the ordered pair, -13, 10, and you can solve it one of 2 ways. That concludes the video for midpoint formula.